Hello, everyone. Welcome. My name is Cassidy Diamond. I am the Associate Director of Public Programs and Events here at the IDA. Thank you for joining us for Q&As around the IDA grantee short films. This is going to be a great conversation around the documentary Elena. It will be followed by a conversation around our second IDA grantee short, 3 Songs for Benazir. But before we get started, I would like to offer a brief land acknowledgement. I'm coming to you today from Chicago, which is on the unceded land of the Potawatomi people who have been stewards of this land for generations. I would also like to thank, as always, IndieWire for their media support in bringing this series to you all. And as always, you can find our remaining upcoming screenings at documentary.org/screening-series. And without any further ado, I'm going to hand things over to Amy Nicholson to get this conversation started around the short film Elena.
Hello, everyone out there. I'm film critic Amy Nicholson, and on behalf of the IDA, I want to thank you for joining us for this Q&A about the film Elena. And please join me in welcoming our director, Michèle Stephenson, and our star, Elena herself, Elena Lorak. Hello. Thank you for being here.
Hi, nice to be here. Thank you.
Muchas gracias, Amy.
Muchas gracias, Elena. So I want to start in just with a little bit of history for the people listening today. I mean, Michèle, you were born in Haiti. Elena, as you see here, in the film, we know that you're from the DR. I mean, these are 2 countries. They share an island of 22 million people. Could you give us some of the history of the tensions between these 2 countries who share an island leading up to, this 2013 Dominican Republic Supreme Court case that stripped citizenship of anyone with Haitian parents, going all the way back to 1929.
Elena, ¿quieres empezar? Y yo sobre la historia entre esas 2 naciones.
Elena, would you like to begin about the story of the 2 nations?
Ok. Bueno, muchísimas gracias, Aida, por la invitación, ¿no? Y de permitirnos también tener esta conversación de cara al cortometraje y un poco también conectándola con nuestra realidad, tanto desde nuestros países. Somos una isla.
Thank you so much, IDA, for allowing us to have this conversation, talking about these 2 countries in the island and for having this space today.
Sí, agradezco a Michèle también por tomar esa iniciativa y de iniciar también de compartir esta historia más allá de lo que se vive ya a través de los lentes de una cámara.
So I also thank Michèle for taking the initiative and for sharing this story more, talking about this initiative of what's being shared through the lens.
Como bien decían, soy de una isla que comparte 2 países, República Dominicana y Haití.
How you were saying, I'm from an island that is shared by 2 countries, the Dominican Republic and Haiti.
Y no sé, por gracia del destino, del mismo Dios, pues convivo dentro de estas 2 islas, siendo mis padres haitianos y yo teniendo la nacionalidad dominicana.
And thanks to destiny or God, I co-inhabit in this island, living in the Dominican Republic and having Haitian parents. Being Dominican and having Haitian parents.
Realidad que ha traído y desde historias, desde siglos, han estado en unas historias que confrontan, en confrontación y que hoy en día sus descendientes vivimos estas situaciones a raíz de todas las medidas que han interpuesto la República Dominicana con la ley 168-13 con todos los sucedidos anterior a esta ley, con la masacre del 37.
The reality is that in this island we have lived these stories for many years, for centuries, and specifically also talking about when it happened, this law 168-13, and also the massacre of 37.
Y decía, con todo el tema de la masacre del 37, las resoluciones 012, la sentencia del Tribunal Constitucional en el 2013 y todas las medidas.
And also with the massacre of 37, the sentence of 012, all of the different rulings at the court, all of these different measures.
Todas las medidas que estamos viviendo ahora, incluso actualmente, toda la decisión que ha tomado el presidente Luis Abinader con relación a la población extranjera, sabiendo que sobre todo es población migrante haitiana, es también un reto y un desafío que cada día más cuestionan y peligran el hecho de nuestra nacionalidad y el origen de nuestros padres.
So it's also a challenge, all of the different measures that our president has taken against Haitian born, Dominican born people of Haitian descent, that they're always questioning our nationalities and also our humanities.
Yes. Y es bueno también recomendarle que nuestros padres llegó a la República Dominicana a través del contrato estatal de azúcar que se mantenía con el Estado Dominicano y el Estado de Haití.
Now, I also want to add that our parents, they arrived to the Dominican Republic by a contract, a sugar cane contract that they had between the countries of Haiti and the Dominican Republic.
Una vez traídos a nuestros padres a la República Dominicana, son asentados en los bateyes. Los bateyes constituyen una especie de aldea o gueto que son creadas alrededor de las plantaciones de las cañas de azúcar.
Now, once our parents are brought to the Dominican Republic, they are living in the bateyes. The bateyes are sugarcane fields, right? So they are working and living next to the sugarcane fields. That is their living situation.
Y bueno, desde esa migración y todos los acontecimientos que se dan, pues nacemos nosotros, los hijos e hijas de padres migrantes haitianos en la República Dominicana.
And so from that migration that took place, that's where we are born, all the children of Haitian parents that we are living and we're born in the Dominican Republic.
Y cuando nacemos, el Estado, pues a través de una documentación que les entregaba a nuestros padres, que es conocido como fichas.
When we're born, through documentation that the state gives our parents, this is called as the fichas.
Este era como un permiso, era como la identificación de las personas en ese momento para circular, para poder tener, incluso para cobrar, para poder ir incluso a los servicios médicos. Y con esa documentación nos declararon.
Now, this was it was almost like a permit. It was our identification. You could get paid with it, you could move around. So that is how we were declared. That's how we were identified.
Lo que no sabíamos era que años más tarde, por esta misma documentación, luego ya que se terminaron con la caña de azúcar, inicia todo un proceso desde el desconocimiento de nuestra nacionalidad.
What we didn't know that would happen was that years later, because of this documentation, there comes a process of clearing of our documentation based on our identity.
No sé si tienen alguna otra pregunta o Michèle quiere iniciar o continuar.
just to add I'm just going to add a few more things. One is the more specific context of the Dominican Republic being like the United States, where if you're born on the soil, you have a right to your citizenship. You know, it doesn't matter what your ancestry is, just like in the United States and in most parts of the Americas, since the Americas are, you know, in the Western Hemisphere, you know, a land of not just colonization and slavery and genocide, but also lands of immigration. So that is one thing. And this is this recognition of the right to the soil, the birthright citizenship that's being battled with. And it is in the Constitution. But the Supreme Court, as we know here in the United States also, intentionally interpreted a certain way to do away with that right specifically for Dominicans of Haitian descent. Now, from a larger sort of historical perspective that I want to kind of add, being a Haitian American woman with this sort of POV lens on that, is that Haiti, and we're seeing it today, has always been sort of this eyesore to global white supremacy, being the first Black independent republic successfully revolted of formerly enslaved people against a colonial power. And it has never sat well with anyone in the world. And it has always been a tension. And as we're having, you know, conversations about critical race theory right now, it is very important to situate the Haitian Revolution in its influence even on the United States today and the search for human rights. And it's also its influence on the rest of the Americas to end slavery in the rest of Latin America as well. So there is a debt that is owed to Haiti. So back to the DR and Haiti. So in some ways, they're opposite sides of the same coin of white supremacy, Haiti being the face of Africa, the face of the formerly enslaved, trying to take power and control over their own destiny and their humanity. And the Dominican Republic, certainly the elites, churning towards Europe, churning towards a Western ideal of which their neighbor is in constant sort of contradiction to them. So from an ideological perspective, there is a need from the elites and those who believe in pigmentocracy to really do away with any connection that exists with Haiti, in spite of the fact that both cultures have been intermingling, I grew up listening to Dominican music with family living on both sides of the island, married to different, to both sides of, so there is that tension. Sorry for the big thing, but just to sort of give that context, I felt was important in addition to what Elena described.
I think that context is wonderful because, I mean, what really struck me watching this film that you guys have put together is it feels here that we're kind of watching a story of like the origin story of the problem of the Americas. I mean, this is the island that Christopher Columbus first landed on. And it feels like the stories that we're living here started there. I mean, there's even talk I've heard on the island of like building a wall, the same kind of problems and ridiculous ideas. I mean, this documentation issue, this has affected 200,000 people. Elena's one story of 200,000 people. Michèle, like, why Elena? How did you guys meet? What really drew you to her?
It's a bit of a long-winded story that I'll sort of summarize, but Elena was one of the first people that I actually met in the research that I was doing to do a film about the denationalization process that took place after September 2013. For me, I was just coming out of a longitudinal documentary called American Promise. We had done a huge community engagement work. And I was thinking about, again, for me, storytelling comes from a very personal space. And when this sentencia happened, it affected me on multiple levels. First of all, just as a human being, but also having my roots on the island, but also being, an immigrant of color here in the United States and understanding, the kind of discrimination we face here as well, that there were connections. And so I wanted to go, and I had done some work on Haiti after the earthquake, actually sort of flipping the narrative and looking at collaborations between Dominicans and Haitians, young Dominicans and Haitians after the earthquake, to reconstitute and to rehabilitate, certain areas in Port-au-Prince. And I reconnected with those folks when the sentencia came down, and they connected me to an organization called Reconocido. And the director of that organization introduced me to Elena. I remember that first time we met in that office as someone who had been stateless for a number of years and was trying to, work through this last, violent bureaucratic onslaught on her. And so she was one of the first people I met. We were collaborating over a number of years. And this is a short film that is an outgrowth of a larger sort of project that includes a feature as well as this short film on Elena's story.
Yeah, the feature that you're referring to, Stateless, which premiered last year, like the characters that you focus on there felt kind of like fighters. You had, a lawyer, an activist on one side. You had a member of the group that was very racist towards the Haitians on the other side. And here, I thought with this documentary, what was striking is you decided to move away from telling the story of the people who were full of hatred, and even from the story of like a professional fighter, and focus on, a smart, tough, ordinary person working through the system. And I wonder for you, Elena, like what convinced you that this was a good idea? And when you watch the documentary, are there days of footage that you're like, oh man, I really remember that I was nervous that day, or, oh, a little awkward?
Bueno, sí, es ver también ese documental me recuerda muchas cosas, ¿no? Me remonta también en todo el proceso de nuestras luchas, de nuestras reivindicaciones. Como decía Michèle, cuando ella se acercó a nosotros en el 2014, ¿no? Hace ya todos esos años, estábamos en una reunión, me acuerdo, de precisamente planificando algunas estrategias de incidencias para el proceso de la reivindicación de nuestra nacionalidad. Y bueno, y desde ahí entonces inició todo ese largo viaje que construye con un propósito de Elena, que para mí ha sido también una sorpresa, ¿no? De que Michèle haya centrado esta historia en nuestras vidas. O sea, yo como mujer negra, hijas de haitianos procedientes del Batey, y como bien usted decía, de representación de más de 200,000 personas, ¿no? O sea, yo soy una de tantas mujeres, hijas de migrantes haitianos, que tienen que luchar y trabajar y sacarse hacia adelante para poder vivir en un sistema racista, patriarcal.
So yes. So to answer your question, watching the documentary, I remember so many things about our fight, about our work towards getting our nationality back. Now, I remember when I first met Michèle back in 2014, we were in a meeting talking about advocacy work, discussing specifically about how could we get our nationality back, right? This issue of statelessness. And to me, it was surprising, like how Michèle made this decision. Like me being a Black woman, being a daughter of Haitian people, being a woman of the Batey, I am one of the many women, daughter of Haitians. And how you were sharing, Amy, there are 200,000 people who have these same stories, fighting against patriarchy, fighting against racism.
I just want to add one thing in terms of Elena. Elena was somebody who was directly affected by the sentencia, but she's also a fighter. She's also part of the Reconocido, a leader in the Reconocido movement in terms of the work towards recognizing, not just the humanity, but their rights to citizenship. It's an organization that is led by Dominicans of Haitian descent.
Yeah. I mean, I'm curious, like when you were capturing details in the film, and I don't know if you had to use a hidden camera or not to go into these bureaucratic places, but to see, things like her father's misspelled name on his birth certificate or like this back and forth bureaucracy, it felt a little bit like the system was just trying to grind down, like Elena to grind down her father. It felt like watching her father that he had sort of run out of like energy or hope. And I didn't know if that was like a really common feeling.
Elena, I think Elena should answer that. Yeah.
Sí, sí, es como te decía, el día a día y bueno, retomo también esa parte, la importancia de este cortometraje, que es también de poner en relieve, de poner al visto, o sea, las realidades que pasan, que pasamos. Y como usted bien decía en la primera pregunta, ¿cómo me siento ahora de ver el documental? Es también ir viendo todos los procesos y las luchas que hemos tenido que venir luchando nosotros, ¿no? Contra el sistema, contra nosotros mismos, para poder llegar y ver esa irrealidad que hay.
Yes, yes. So how I was sharing, it's the day-to-day, the importance of this short film, how you have shared, how you have said to showcase all of these different realities, to show all of these different processes that we have been through.
Ujú. Y ver de que el apellido, los nombres de nosotros, de nuestros padres, en una documentación legal estén mal escrito, y es parte también de esta parte que se habla de racismo, donde el Estado no emplea en sus funcionarios personas que puedan hablar el mismo idioma, personas que investiguen antes de escribir. Porque al momento de mi padre realizar el proceso en la Junta tenía una documentación, pero su apellido lo escribieron mal.
So that thing that you were sharing about the last name, seeing our parents' last names on documentation that they have written mistakes on their last names. This is part of the racism. This is part of this thing that we're discussing of not being able to have people working for the government who can speak our languages, who can provide us with the correct information.
Pero eso no es solamente con mis padres. Esto también constituye una realidad que incluso es la que también cuestiona mucho el Estado. Un error del oficial civil es la paga de muchos. Con la malinterpretación de los nombres.
So this is not just with my parents. This is a bigger issue, right? This constitutes a larger problem, right? So let's say with the misinterpretation of the last name of my parents.
De nuestros padres, de nosotros mismos como sus descendientes, pues muchas veces quedamos al margen de quiénes son nuestros padres. Cuando está mal escrito, aparte para poder hacer la corrección, eso constituye también en gastos, en tiempos, en las oficialías y más cuando son personas migrantes.
So with the misspelling of the last names, right? This is getting us farther away from our parents. It also contributes to fees and additional costs trying to address and correct all of these different mistakes in the documentation.
Creo que con este también cortometraje es también ver cómo se da el día a día, ¿no? de las personas. Quizás en este momento soy yo, pero como movimiento, como bien decía Michèle, soy parte del movimiento reconocido. Actualmente estoy como coordinadora y el movimiento es un movimiento que lucha por los derechos de las personas dominicanas y dominicanos de ascendencia haitiana.
Now, so I think that with this short film, you are able to see the day-to-day. Maybe you will be able to see, yes, yeah, it's me that I am the protagonist, but you will also see I am a part of the Reconocido Movimiento. The Reconocido Movimiento, this movement fights for Dominican people and Dominican people of Haitian descent.
Que agrupa a jóvenes como yo, provenientes de los batalles, que vivimos nuestras vidas suspendidas por todas las leyes que ya le hemos mencionado, en el 2011 se crea la organización y es para para luchar y reivindicar nuestro derecho a la nacionalidad dominicana.
So this group, it's a group of different young people, and we are all coming from the different batallas, the sugarcane fields, and it was started back in 2011, and all of us were fighting to fight back for our citizenship, our birthright citizenship of the Dominican Republic, which has been put on hold since this occurrence.
Y es a raíz de esto, pues no solamente incidimos a nivel de las políticas violatorias de la desnacionalización, sino trabajamos temas de derechos humanos, el acompañamiento y todo el proceso de formación en este tema y el liderazgo. Y es por esto también, y a raíz de esto que conozco a Michèle. Y esto también nos permite y nos da una luz del acompañamiento, de poder luchar por esta reivindicación, no solo por la nacionalidad dominicana, sino también el establecer que nuestros orígenes son haitianas. Está bien, tengo el derecho al suelo, como bien decía Michèle, porque la Constitución en ese momento lo decía, aunque fue cambiada en el 2010, pero esto es lo que nosotras reclamamos.
So because of this, not only are we doing advocacy work around human rights and also statelessness, but it's our reivindication, our saying that we are of Haitian descent. It's also about leadership building our organization. And this thing that Michèle was discussing earlier, which was around our birthright of being Dominican citizens. Yeah.
I just want to add just one small thing to what she was saying is, and relating to what you're talking about, her father being sort of demoralized from the process. It's really about the young people picking up the baton and continuing the fight, because this is what violent bureaucracy does. It hits you and hits you and hits you until you have no more energy to be able to fight, right? And so it's up to the next generation to pick it up again. But you don't need, the violence of the massacre of 37 to render people invisible anymore. All you need is a reluctant bureaucracy with the power of that person, that officer on the other side of the table to deny you, your humanity.
Yeah.
Claro.
And in those scenes with her
Sí,
father.
claro, y parte también de esto, no sé si desde el documental pueden presenciar de que mi padre aún sigue en el batey y sigue trabajando la caña, ¿no? Y aún así no tiene derechos garantizados, no tiene un seguro médico, no tiene una pensión, y mi padre ya va a tener 72 años. Entonces, nuestros hijos, sus hijos.
Yes. So also you can see that, for example, my father, he's still in the sugarcane fields. He's still in the batey. He's about 70 years old and he doesn't have rights. He doesn't have rights to a pension. He doesn't have health insurance.
Y esto hace de que sus hijos también son desconocidos por el Estado. Lo que siempre decimos, hay una esclavitud moderna que se traduce en que, bueno, se les paga, pero ¿cuánto se les paga? Es una miseria que no le permita salir de ese círculo. Y nosotros como sus descendientes tenemos que luchar y sobrepasar estas barreras en las que el mismo Estado nos ha puesto.
So what ends up happening is that there is a situation of modern day slavery. All of the people that are his children, we will also have to be fighting for this and to be able to overcome all of these different issues, because yes, he's a person, but then he gets paid very poorly and it's a tough situation.
Yeah. I mean, I want to talk a little bit about like the filmmaking choices in here too, as you're telling the story, like the scenes with the father. What really stuck out to me just as kind of a beautiful coincidental moment that happens in documentaries is that he's wearing that shirt for The Great Escape, which just felt so resonant for a person who feels so stuck. And another choice you made, Michèle, that I'd love to hear more about is in this story that's about kind of impersonal bureaucracy, you kind of introduce us to Elena as she's fixing her hair, and you sort of end the film with us watching Elena fix her hair. And I was really curious about that choice for you and what you wanted the audience to sort of understand or feel.
That's sort of a personal sort of thing for me is I just found a lot of dignity in that process in terms of one's own humanity and our ability to continue to be to do the day-to-day that gives us nourishment, whether it's through our family relationships or taking care of ourselves as well, as we face, the fight of the outside, the onslaught of the outside. So there's a level of intimacy that I felt was really important. And even for me, when I very much personally connected to her mother combing her hair. There's something about that process for me that brought me back to my childhood and the connections with mother nourishment and protection that through the process of combing hair, that for me was really powerful. And for me, the visuals, that's why I make film, the idea of the visuals hitting you somewhere else that's not in the head, but that allows for, again, the connection of our common humanity, but also this sense of dignity and resilience and resistance that makes us all human, and giving the space for that from a visual, with a visual language to it.
I love that. Well, on behalf of everybody in the audience, I really want to thank you, Michèle, you, Elena, for putting together this film, because I think what you've shown through your different perspectives is how, Elena, your work day to day with the people that with your group are helping to affect change. And then Michèle jumping in and trying to also show another way of affecting change, of getting the word out. I just think together it's a really beautiful partnership. So I'm so glad that you guys made this film. And I just want to join everyone in thanking you, and also thanking our wonderful interpreters, Andrea Lest and Flavia Franco. We're so grateful that you were here to moderate this conversation for us and help. On behalf of the IDA, thank you so much for watching Elena. And please tell your friends about this. Tell your friends also about stateless if this is a topic that you really want to learn more about, which I'm sure you do after watching this. And please follow the work of the activists on the ground like Elena, who we're very grateful for. They're fighting a fight that we're all fighting. So thank you, everyone, for being here.
Thank you so much, Amy, for taking the time. Appreciate it.
So thank you all so much for giving this space, IDA and Amy. And what I wanted to, I know we are very short on time, I'm so sorry, but I wanted to end with this. Part of this scene around the combing hair scene, it has a lot to do with my roots, my Haitian roots. Now, before the documentary, I would always straighten out my hair. So doing this documentary and seeing that scene, and I'm thankful for Michèle for adding this, because being here in the Dominican Republic, it feels as if you're always being treated as ugly or othered, and it does speak back about allowing my mother to comb my hair and owning those roots, those Haitian roots, and being proud about it. So to conclude, and I know we're running out of time, I'm so sorry, but I want to talk about the fact that our parents, if our parents are going through this, our parents don't have health insurance, don't have life insurance, then the daughters and sons of our parents will go through the same thing. But we have a decision to make. We can't just sit down and cry and complain about it and not do anything. The film also talks about the hope, the going forward and fighting against all of those things, and yes, and fighting for our citizenship. So thank you one more time. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Amy, Michèle, and Elena, and our interpreters, Andrea and Flavia, for that conversation. I'm Mirzaei Castillo, Public Programs and Events Manager with IDA. I'm here to introduce our next conversation with the filmmakers of 3 Songs for Benazir, moderated by Simon Kilmurray. Hi, Simon. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Rosal, and it gives me great pleasure to introduce the filmmakers Elizabeth and Gulistan Mirzaei, who are both directors and producers of Three Songs for Benazir, and producer Omar Malik. Great to meet you all, and thank you for such a beautiful film. Elizabeth and Gulistan, let me start with you, if I might. How did you first meet Shaista and Benazir? And tell us where this camp is in relation to Kabul.
Yeah, do you want to answer that first? You can talk about where the camp is, I think.
Thank you so much, Simon, for having us. We know Shaista after more than 10 years. When we volunteering food in the camp, we met him, Shaista, on there, and he's very kind and intelligent, and it's different between his family. He has a lot of hope and he has a lot of hope and dreams. We became a good friend. I understand Shaista because he's a refugee. I was refugee too in Iran. My experience is like a different. I have 3 times food in Iran, and I live in the tent. My father killed during the Soviet. I was refugee in Iran, and then Shaista. After 35 years, Shaista is like a displaced. He's living in displacement camp, and it doesn't. The war. It doesn't end. A few years, Shaista. After a few years, Shaista said he got married, and. He told me I want to join with the National Army, and then I told Elizabeth, and Elizabeth told me it's different because the situation of the camp, and because it's very different, because news he can't go work go one time with the
we could just add that the camp is in Kabul, but like how far outside the city center would you say?
For this
for this camp, like 20 minutes or so.
20 minutes for the capital, for the place.
About 20 minutes away.
So they had been displaced from another region of Afghanistan.
Yes, they were from southern Afghanistan, but they'd been there. They'd been displaced for many years by the time we had met them. Yeah.
And at what point did you, after meeting them, say, there's a story here. There's something particular about Shaista and Benazir's relationship which we want to tell.
Yeah, I think, we knew there was something really special about Shaista almost immediately when we met him. He just has this very disarming smile, and there was something really, really captivating about him that we were drawn to. But it was a few years before we started filming, and especially after he introduced us to Benazir, and we thought and then he talked about his dreams of joining the army, and we thought, we weren't sure exactly what was there, but we knew that there was something in their relationship, in this love story that we just don't see much of from this region at all. And we just decided, not knowing where it would go, just to start filming with both of them. So it was a few years that we'd already been friends when we started that.
I mean, there's a lot of things in the movie that are very touching. But I think one of the things that really struck me is so refreshing. We see a lot of documentaries on displaced people who've been displaced by conflict, but they're often cast as victims of war. And one of the things that I found so beautiful is it's a love story, and it's also this, you know, they have aspirations and dreams, and those are a central theme in the movie.
Yeah.
And it was so wonderful to feel that dimensionality, that they're not just victims of a circumstance.
Mhm.
Um,
Yeah, you can talk about why you wanted to make the film too.
The reason I made this film, I'm from Afghanistan. I was not happy with the way the media showed my country. As an Afghan filmmaker, I believe my voice is important and necessary to tell a story. I want to show a different part of Afghanistan, a love story, war, Taliban. It's not that's not the whole story. I want to show what young loves like in Afghanistan. I want to show the hope and dreams of young people.
mm-hmm. Omar, at what point did you meet up with Elizabeth in Gulistan and get involved in the film? And what spoke to you in the work that they were doing?
Well, Elizabeth and I had actually circled each other professionally, as is the case with this small documentary community, on a couple of other projects. I think she can tell you, and Gulistan, that, like, you know, if someone's doing something on the region, there are actually not that many people that you go to. We all know each other, you know, or it's like one degree of separation. And so I think that's how we initially were aware of each other, and then stayed in touch, I think, through that project, which, to be candid and humble about it, was a problematic one. But you recognize immediately that, oh, there's an affinity here, and these are good people. And the reason I mention that is because when you meet good people, you're like, oh, you hit it off, and you're like, oh, you know, I'd love to see their version or my version when they're in the cockpit. Mm-hmm. And then a hop, skip, and a jump later, here they are, you know, in the cockpit of this exquisite film. And as they're tweaking and tinkering and you know, with the edit and all that, and we've got voices around them, you know, I, as I suspect happened with everybody else, jackknifed out of bed and was like, my God, this is nothing short of the Holy Grail for people from that region. And, you know, prior to you starting this recording, you know, you were very kind about work I had done earlier. But I see all of those efforts in a continuum of sorts, and I see this particular film that Gulistan and Elizabeth done as just candidly and vulnerably and unapologetically the finest and clearest expression of these collective aspirations of people from that region. So to answer the last part of what it means to me, the film is, you know, you've got to give it some context for where us as filmmakers come from. I'm ethnically Pashtun on both sides. And, you know, they're a collection of about 55 tribes who, the joke goes in the region that an Englishman took a pencil around his teacup to cut right through the middle, not where the natural border is, but just right through those tribes. So I'm like, my friends joke, half Ghani on one side and you know, which is a common mix, and then people get booted around and displaced, and then you wake up one day, and if you're Gulistan in Iran or Elizabeth in that, you know, speaks the language better than me, maybe all of us together, and me too, you're scratching yourself, you know, wondering how you've been reduced to these little things. So something like this film becomes that rare thing in documentary film, it becomes necessary. Mm-hmm. You know, and that's the feeling that it conjures in it for me. The one last thing I'll say, and then I'll shut up, is that you know, it's one thing to pull off a film like this, which is an extraordinary feat, and to revisit these characters years later and see what that means. And how many people do that anymore, right? That harkens to a golden age of what we look at as the kind of documentaries that inspire us. And they've done that. And then to have the courage to follow through on this very particular take without giving too much away in the film, which would be wrong to do, means that we all sit in awe of it. And then you wonder as a producer, that can this film, which is so much, so much of young people searching out their place with very universal story, and have this great imagination, how can it find a place in a world that actually has a poverty of imagination about these people? And so this is what makes being on board this film at this particular moment so very exciting for me.
I think that's a really interesting point about the poverty of imagination. Despite all the media that we get exposed to, we still only see a very, very small slice generally. And that's one of the things that's so refreshing. And I know that the conflict isn't central to the story, but it's always there in the background. We have the the surveillance balloon, and your shooting of that is kind of perfect because it's just hanging out there. And then we have, I think it's Shaista, or maybe it's his father, who has this kind of big poignant quote: "We will either be bombed by foreigners or killed by the Taliban." And it's kind of a joke, but it's also kind of real, right? I mean, that's the kind of lack of options is constantly there. And I want to talk a little bit about Shaista's kind of trying to make this choice in life, right? He's fallen in love. That relationship is their kind of tenderness between each other is palpable. But he has a choice of, do I go harvest poppies or do I join the army? Talk about the kind of those choices that people face, or rather the lack of choices that people face.
Yeah, I think it's really about the lack of choices, because what he has so few options, and even though he has these hopes and dreams, it was really painful for us to see them not be realized. Like, we were really hoping that he would actually be able to join the army. And then I think one thing we wanted to kind of bring up in the film, just in a more subtle way, was like the idea of who is the enemy, because it's kind of like, on the one hand, it could be easy to look at the Taliban as the enemy. On the other hand, like the Americans have displaced them by the bombing, but they're also at risk from the Taliban. And so it's like, it's just, there's no easy answers. There's no easy good person or good group to identify or align yourself with. And then people like Shaista just caught up in the currents of everything that's happening without many choices or options. And I mean, in terms of the context, what you said is, we really tried. We wanted to bring in kind of the conflict, but very much in the background. So in a detached way, just like the balloon is just tethered and just kind of lingering over this eye in the sky, but completely detached from what's happening on the ground. And that was just something that we felt we've just seen so much. So without really bringing it into too much attention, we just wanted to kind of set it up as this is the world that they live in, and are operating in.
Well, I mean, there's a moment where he and his family are gathered. He's with his father and brothers, I believe. And you see the balloon over there, and I'm thinking, oh my God, you have 6 Afghan men gathered together. What does that look like through the lens of surveillance? Mm-hmm. And it's kind of terrifying. It's a moment of, is someone going to make a mistake? Mm-hmm. Which we see I've seen so often over the years.
One thing I'd love to add to this is that there's an irony here, and it's actually quite delicious with regard to the film, is that on the one hand, it looks at what is a love story, as you rightfully pointed out, and that's so not what we typically see as associated with the region. And yet, oddly, as someone who for years was technically and formally a war photographer and a conflict, and I did South America, like a love story played out is actually the reality of what most of the war zones I saw. People are living real lives. It's not, it's in we're both from the Great Britain, Simon, and my hero was Don McCullin growing up, who famously said, I think, that it's 99% tedium and 10 minutes. Mm-hmm. So it was actually oddly, it hits both bullseyes if you really want to, and in both fronts it's radical. It's both a human story like that, and if you do want to address it in the war context, it's actually truer than the lies of a kind of continuous bang bang sexy take on that region and stuff like that. People live ordinary lives, and then something comes out of the ordinary or hangs in the distance in the background. So it's accomplishments. And I'll make the filmmakers blush with this, but that's okay. That's my job. Is that they can't be overstated on either front. It's really that exquisite and that quietly radical a departure from the sort of films we've seen.
Yes, I couldn't agree with you more. That I think the mistake of a lot of coverage, both in documentary but also in news, is the focus on the intensity of the explosive moments rather than the great gaps between those, where ordinary lives somehow remain lived in that context. You follow Shaista and Benazir over a period of time, and we go back to Afghanistan 4 years later. Give us a sense of kind of when that is in terms of actual time. When did you start? When did you wrap filming on the 4 years later section?
I can answer.
Yeah.
So we were filming from 2000. I think we started in 2013 and 14, 15. Maybe we started in 2012, and then I got pregnant, so we left Afghanistan at that time when I was pregnant with our first child. We were here for a few years, and then we had the opportunity to go back, and we had kept in touch with Shaista, but it was also really hard to reach him. So because of the nature of where he lives and without having electricity, so oftentimes we'd reach him through one of our producers, who would go in person to the camp and find Shaista and then get on the phone. We would get on the phone with him that way. But there was a few times when he couldn't, there was like a couple months he couldn't find Shaista, and we had no idea where he was. And then Humayun said that he found that Shaista was living under the bridge, and it was actually the same bridge where we had filmed our last documentary, Layla at the Bridge, where everyone is, using heroin and opium. And we were completely shocked to learn it. We were actually on the verge of returning to Afghanistan for a different project at that time with the intention to see Shaista, but we arranged for him to have treatment at a center because we wanted him to, we were really worried that he could die under the bridge, as we've seen many times ourselves. So it was just like a very strange kind of connection of everything kind of coming full circle. And he brought him to the treatment center, and then we came out there to film with him. So that was in the end of 2019 that we were doing the last filming with him at that point.
Mm-hmm. It is both shocking but also kind of wonderful, that moment in the treatment center when Benazir arrives with now 2 children. Yeah. And actually Shaista looks even healthier than ever. But she's kind of brilliant in a way. When he says, "I'm ready to come home," she says, "No, you're staying for a little bit longer." But there's a strength to their bond which comes through there. We have all the playfulness at the beginning, but then Benazir's strength of character is quite apparent in that relationship.
Yeah, she's very quiet, but she's very stoic as well. And I think it really comes out in that scene.
Have Shaista and Benazir had a chance to see the film yet, or has that been too hard to?
Shaista has. You can talk about how I saw
through
it.
My nephew went there and he bring with the telephone, WhatsApp. He watched through the WhatsApp.
We streamed it from WhatsApp, yeah.
And yeah, he watched the film.
Okay. And how did he feel seeing himself and his family on?
He's very happy, and he didn't believe it. Just like when he saw the film and just laughing and happy.
Yeah, because I think a lot of it it was like things he had forgotten, because it was so long in the making. So yeah, we would love for him to see it in person one day, like actually sit him down on the big screen.
That would indeed be wonderful. Of course, I have to ask, things in Afghanistan have been tumultuous over the past months, and very challenging, I'm sure, for people like Shaista and Benazir. But how are they doing now? Are they still in the camp? How are the kids?
He's living, sitting in the camp, but the situation in Afghanistan is very difficult, especially now, just the no food, and just we try to send the money for his family to support, and it's really difficult. It's no food and just and expensive.
People are on the verge of starvation. It really feels like the international media has kind of moved on now to other stories. We've already forgotten about Afghanistan. And even getting support is really difficult because there's you have to kind of get approvals for certain fundraising campaigns on platforms. And then you're only allowed to take out a small amount of money when you wire it over at a time. So there's just a lot of complications.
Well, I hope that 3 Songs for Benazir will remind people of the true cost of these kinds of, going back to what Omar was saying, the colonial divisions of these countries, which we're still living out the legacy of through the conflicts that they've experienced over the past few years. That it's just ordinary folk, ordinary beautiful people like Shaista and Benazir and their families, who are the ones ultimately who suffer through this, but yet somehow continue to muddle their way through and building lives and families and trying to live ordinary lives. I want to congratulate you on the movie. I want to congratulate you on your Cinema nomination, and wish you good luck on this journey as you move forward, and thank you.
Thank you so much, Simon.
Thank you so much, Simon.
Thank you.